joining WCAPS as we sit in on this discussion regarding Taiwanese American identity and the intersections with society, policy, and advocacy. We are having this conversation as a part of WCAPS's Heritage and Observance Month initiative, where we highlight the diversity that exists within the United States, as well as our membership. We would like to give special thanks to Yu-Lin and Jessica for sitting down for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So I will just start to the very first question. I can obviously answer it first, or Jessica, if you want to jump in, just whichever works. So just to get started, how do you talk about your Taiwanese identity with folks around you? And do you find it difficult to explain to people where you're from? Or tell us a little bit about your experience.
Okay, so I don't really find it difficult to explain to people. I think people first need to have curiosity about what is a Taiwanese American, right? Because if you have a Taiwanese passport, on the passport it says Republic of China and then Taiwan. So you first need to have that curiosity. And like any country, really, I can't really think of any country that doesn't have a complicated history in some way, shape, or form. And so usually I try not to initiate the conversation. If somebody wants to initiate the conversation, I'll let them initiate the conversation about what is Taiwanese American. And also, I think, I have a lot of conditions before like telling people what is Taiwanese American. And I think one of the ideas that would make me speak up about what is Taiwanese American is if people get it confused with like Chinese American, because I think that's very different. And if you ask me, well, then yeah, so basically in short, I let the other party bring it up. The only exception is if they have, I would say an incorrect interpretation of what it is to be Taiwanese American, then I'll say something.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's with a question. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Do you find it, I think for me, we can obviously talk about it together. I sometimes, how would you explain to people who are new to this, Taiwanese American identity compared to the Chinese American identity, and how would you engage in such conversation?
Okay, so first, going back to my first point is I let the other party bring it up, or if they have a completely wrong idea of what that means, then I'll say something.
Yeah.
And I would say the biggest difference is the fact that it's not free in China, right? I mean, that's a very broad statement. When I say free, it's free in the sense of like a political sense. You don't have the freedom of speech, the freedom to express yourself, the freedom to get correct information. You don't even have that in place. I mean, because if you look at Taiwan, if you go on some of these internet platforms, for example, PTT, which is I would say like the Taiwanese, I don't want to say Reddit, but it's kind of like the Taiwanese, internet platform. You have people saying all kinds of things about the president. You don't see that in China.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? So that is a very, I would say, significant difference in these two identities. Here's freedom in digital format. So that's one of the biggest distinctions I make. And also, like, you just find that Chinese people, yes, to some extent, they don't really like to, well, Taiwanese Americans, they may or may not like to express themselves, but I think they express themselves a lot more than you see Chinese Americans do.
Yeah. I think for me, for my case, when I introduce myself as a Taiwanese American, so I think to give more context, I was born in Boston, but I moved back to Taiwan when I was 3 months old. So I've always had the American passport, but I grew up in Taiwan, and I only moved back to the US last summer, and I'm 24 years old. So throughout my entire life, I have been in Taiwan, gotten the Taiwanese education. So now that I'm in the US and people are asking me like, oh, where are you from? I always say that I'm from Taiwan, but I do have an American passport and I have this sort of fusion identity of being a Taiwanese American, but definitely lean more towards, the Taiwanese aspect where I have this Taiwanese sensibility. I'm definitely more of a collectivist person. And I think, I still have a lot of culture shock coming here. So yes, I do have this identity of being a Taiwanese American. And when I introduce myself, I think there's a de facto Taiwanese part and the jure American part of me that I am still trying to figure out what that means for me. And I think I also have other friends from Taiwan who was are born in the US but raised in Taiwan. And I think it's really interesting that for this Taiwanese American identity, it sort of feels like it's a spectrum. I think Jessica, you're definitely like in a different spectrum than I am. Curious what you think though. I don't want to like impose this idea on you, but I think for me, the Taiwanese American identity, it feels like a spectrum, depending on your experience and how long you've been in Taiwan and the US, it really is very diverse. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with the concept of a spectrum,
Mhm.
and its identity is shaped by so many different things. First and foremost, I think by family you come from, and then by school, by your education, by your friends, by your external influences, the media. I mean, I can't think of one thing that doesn't shape your identity. And I think the most important question is, I don't know about you, but I never like, to me, identity was never a big question. I
Mhm.
think when people ask me, I would just tell them, and they'd be a little bit confused. But then
Mhm.
it's like, it's to me, identity is just shaped by your behavior and your beliefs, which shape your behavior,
Yeah.
right? And that usually, the way I look at it, it's like result driven. Like, what do you want to see? Of course, you're not always going to say what you want to say, but it is results driven.
Yeah, it is like result driven. And I also feel like I'm having, starting to think about this identity question, you know, especially in the US. I think people with the US-China competition going on, I think, once people know that you're from Taiwan or there's like a Taiwan element of your identity, people are definitely more curious and wanting to understand what that means. And I think I've never really paid that much attention on it, but people's been asking me a lot of creative question, and I think it definitely driven my looking into having a conversation with myself and figuring out what that actually means for me as well. Yeah. And okay, so to move on to the next question, Jessica, I would like to ask you, how involved are you with the policy space, if at all? And how are you involved? And also, like, are you also involved in the advocacy, activism aspect in advocating or talking about what it means to be a Taiwanese American in the policy world?
So I'm definitely not involved directly in terms of like a leadership capacity or even like part of a group because I just feel like I don't know. Unlike you, it's just point blank, it's a fact. I'm not really collectivist at all. Even though I've lived in Taiwan for a while,
Yeah.
I've just never, it's never been something that I've like actually accepted. And it's never, I don't really think it's caused a division either. It's just like, when you're in a group, you're influenced by everybody else. And so I try to not be involved directly, but indirectly. And by indirectly, I mean when people ask me, I will tell them,
Mhm.
right? Like I'm usually never the one to bring up this question, but people, when they ask, I will just tell them. And I don't know why, for whatever reason, it shocks them or it makes them think like, wow, I've never heard of that. But I guess,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's it's one of those things where, you know, going back to the idea of policy, it's very interest driven, right? Uh, and having lived in the US, having like watched some, read about political campaigns and all that stuff, you do realize a lot of it is it's driven by money, it's driven by power and what objectives people vote for. And I don't know, it's never been the reason why I would, want to get involved or am involved because of that.
Mm,
So, so
yeah.
yeah. And plus, like when you look at these interests, I was showing you, I posted some like little clips about like different like big consulting company, right, or what they were doing, right? And a lot of that is masked. You have to look at the data, like where are they coming from, who are their stakeholders, who are their interest groups, and all of that. And this is where I think identity isn't really talked about because what I think it looks like from their perspective, it's about the interests, or it's about what you can benefit out of the interests that you're involved with.
Yeah.
So that's when identity is really just like it's not really there. And even if it is discussed, it's discussed very superficially.
Hmm. Or I
So
feel,
yeah.
talking about from your previous, when you introduced, the difference between what it's like being a Taiwanese American and Chinese American, there's this mention of Taiwan being a democratic society. And I feel like, to go back to what you just said, that there's a rhetoric thing and identity that it sort of is only on a superficial level. I do resonate with that in the context of, democracy, we're all in this together type of conversation, that it feels like it's checkbox to mention that part and then just to move on. Yeah.
Yeah. But also I want to mention is I don't know if you saw one of the latest like Pew Research surveys, like it was asking, I think one of the questions was, um, how much do you like, I don't know the exact phrasing, but how much do you like being, Taiwanese American? How proud are you of being Taiwanese American and Chinese American? You can see the data shows that not the Taiwanese American, more people liked being Taiwanese American than they liked being Chinese. And I
Yeah.
wonder why, right?
Yeah. I also feel like it's this entire context of US-China competition that makes people deter from having this, Chinese American identity because of, the bashing on China aspect. And, it's becoming a collectivist echo chamber, especially in DC, that, having this identity is not really um, beneficial towards like your interaction with people. I guess that's one of the reasons why people are a little bit more percentage of Taiwanese American prefer having that identity compared to Chinese American. Yeah. And I think so to give the audience a little bit more of a context, uh Adriana said Taiwan feels like a safer identity to have in this climate. I
Yeah, I
can't
agree.
disagree with that. I can't disagree with that. Um, so I work as a research assistant from Taiwan's Academia Sinica. So I focused on US-China-Taiwan relations, especially on US declaratory policy and how Taiwanese people view US's policy. I am also currently working in DC as a program assistant at the Atlantic Council doing international development. And this organization focuses more on US's national security and national interest in how US should portray itself in a lot of international incidents. So I think it's really interesting that I'm having these sort of clashes of interest, being having the American identity and, the Taiwanese identity. And, you're seeing how research is being conducted on both sides and how the rhetoric is very different and understanding of, cross-strait relations, US-Taiwan relations is a little bit different. I think for me is really interesting to see. And I think as a Taiwanese American, one of my job is to sort of be the mediator and or try or explore the possibility of being a mediator and providing more of perspective on both sides. Especially, I think, like I mentioned previously, I lean more towards my Taiwanese identity, at least for now. I think it's really important to bring the Taiwanese voice and perspective on, election, their relationship with how they prefer their approach with China into the conversation in the US foreign policy arena. So yeah, really interesting to be sort of in the middle of this and while still figuring out what I hope to stand in these conversation. Yeah, okay. So let's go to our third question. And that is, Jessica, what do you think are people's perceptions of you as you engage in these policy advocacy spaces? And what pressure and challenges do you think that you usually face in these conversation? I know you're very, follow you on Instagram, so I know you're very active on Instagram and talking about, cross stuff. I absolutely love it, but I'm also curious what you think, when you're sharing these thoughts to people, like what are some challenges when you're navigating it?
Well, so far, it's because one of the things about my Instagram, it's private. I don't like use a public account, so I haven't really gotten any hate. Okay, that's probably why I haven't gotten any hate. But now I think some of the things that I have said or posted, number one is I've always given the link. Like, where did I read this? What's the source? Whatever. But it's possible that if there was someone that completely disagreed or has a different interest or whatever, something more devious, then they could probably take it and twist it and do whatever. But I would say the challenge is just, getting people to think about another perspective. And as far as perception goes, is okay. Well, if you're not going to do it, who's going to do it?
Mhm.
Right? And again, it's not really about like, posting just for the sake of the posting, but it's really posting for like clarity or to clear up any like misunderstandings. So that in itself, I would say, is a challenge in the sense that is people have to be open to hearing new perspectives or ones they've never heard of, right?
Yeah.
And then consider the source of where that is coming from and why that's being posed in the way that it is being posed.
Yeah. I think, the getting the information right, I really resonate with you because it's really different. It's really interesting to see how, the Taiwanese perspective in Taiwan, like I know you currently study a master's degree in Taiwan. You probably have conversation with your friends and professors that it might be a little bit different than the one in Taiwan. And sort of bringing this information to both sides has its challenge because people have their own comfort bubble with understanding how it works. And it takes a lot of thinking and energy to jump out of the box and think about something else. Yeah. So I don't know if that's your experience when you mean by the challenges in getting information right.
Well, like it's not even that. I think that's one like aspect. The other point is people have to open their hearts and minds to listen to like the perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say one of the reasons why people are closed-minded is because again, interests. For example, Taiwan is not a big economic market compared to China.
No.
That in itself is already, I would say, a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not that these people don't understand what's the difference between Taiwan and China. It's rather that they have these economic interests that they just can't not consider.
Mm-hmm.
And it's their priority. for some of these people, especially if you talk to business people, that is their priority.
Yeah.
They don't need to say it, but look at their actions and you know that what is their priority.
Yeah, the priorities are different. And I think I'm seeing a lot of debate in Washington, D.C., where it sort of feels like a zero sum that you can only pick one part of it. But on a business perspective and other allies, I think no one would like to pick only one side. And their interest in different things. And like you said, there's the very realistic material reason to not want to have to pick one camp. And
Yeah.
I think for me, that brings back to one of my, I think while I'm doing these process, the difficulties to sort of pinpoint that it's actually not a zero sum, that we can only pick one side of it. And that it's really, I think for me, the challenge is to try and persuade people to think about a little bit of other ways to view cross-strait relations and Taiwan's approach, US's approach, that might conventionally be viewed as a dovish approach or perception. I think it is quite difficult and it's challenging to sort of get the information, to people and bringing another perspective that they would, show interest and listen to. I think that's one of the challenges. And another one I think comes from more of the Taiwanese perspective, that I think it is, I've spoken to a lot of people in the US, and they're quite surprised that 90% of Taiwanese people, want to stick to the status quo on what's going on with China. And because of like the medias that they consume in the US, it feels a little bit more urgent, that they want to do something. They feel like Taiwan needs to do something about it. And everyone in Taiwan is very alarmed. And I think just bringing this piece of information to the US and telling them that actually, we've been dealing this for a really long time and, we've got our own method. Yes, we can need some help from the US, but there's also a existing model between cross-strait. I think sort of being the messenger has been a little bit challenging on my end when I talk to researchers and policy people in the US. Yeah. Andrea said, you mean to say the government media isn't representing the situation that's reflective of the feelings on the ground? Imagine that. Yeah, I think, do you feel like that, Jessica?
Well, with any like news organization, they do all have some sort of bias. It's human to have bias, but like I would say, even like the ones in Taiwan, they're very obvious, like what they lean towards. But again, like at that point, I just question them. What about this perspective? Why didn't you talk about this? That's different. That's omission through intention, right?
Yeah.
It's not lying, right? Which would get them in trouble, but they're just omitting information,
Yeah, I think,
which is not against the law. So
yeah. I think that's one of the things that I'm really happy that at least in Taiwan, that it's a opened environment where all ideas are invited and it's public and people have access to it. So if you're showing a little bit of interest in that, at least you would have sources to look into and get inspiration from. Yeah. Anyways, so to continue to follow up with what we just talked about, do you think you have any plans for engagement and education regarding the identity and culture of Taiwanese Americans, whether, well, during your time in Taiwan or, when you're back in the US?
I would say again, it's if people are curious, I'd be willing to share, but I'm not the kind of person that, that would just be like, oh, here's what I think about something and just push it on to people. Like I think you have to be in a certain kind of circumstance, a certain kind of environment to do that in order for it also to be effective.
Yeah.
And by effective, I mean you have for people to hear, okay, to understand the differences and to understand why the differences matter. And it's not to cause division, but it's rather to make a distinction of, okay, there is a reason why these differences exist. Okay.
Mhm.
And this is why maybe you're not seeing certain results that you hope to see in a democracy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Mhm. And I think for my plans for engagement and for that, I think for me, I am still in a very, like I said previously, I'm in an exploring phase of what it actually means to be a Taiwanese American. I think I've just been a Taiwanese while I was in Taiwan. And, in the US, I've just been a American in some ways, just working with American colleagues and stuff. And I haven't met a lot of Taiwanese American while I'm in the US. So I think for me, I'm hoping to sort of just be more engaged in that community. And I know we have this film festival every year in Taiwanese Film Festival in the US. And also we have in DC, we have a lot of Dragon Boat Festival competition that is huge here. Definitely, I think for me, I would be interested in involving in these activities and getting to talk with people more and exchange our ideas of what it actually means. And yeah, I don't know, Jessica, maybe you would have more ideas of what I should do with that.
I mean, do what you please, right? But like, if you can, just maybe have a conversation that is if all everybody's okay with, just have it on the record and just show people, look, this is what it means, and here is a important historical document,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because at some point, I'm sure the identities would just become more distinctive, and people want to know, and people want to know, oh, what did people before me, what did they think about this, right? Because if you talk to people who think, who are like for Taiwan independence, I'm not, because of all the repercussions that it would bring. But those people, like, they have really, really strong opinions. I can't say they're wrong, but it's their perspective.
Yeah. So
Right.
I think it's just really important to at least have a conversation and exchange what you think instead of just talking to your own people and creating your own universe, but and getting all shocked when one idea gets popped up in the air and you feel like this is your first time hearing it. Yeah, I think that's definitely the exchange interaction part is important. Yeah. So I think we're running a little bit short on time. So I'm just gonna ask you, one very light question. What do you think is the most, the best thing and the most amazing thing of being a Taiwanese American?
Well, you are free to be yourself. You're free to ask questions. You're free to debate. You're free to probe. You're free to investigate. You're free to, talk about what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the present, and what's happening, what's going to happen in the future. You're free to do that. In China, you're not free to do that.
Yeah. And I think for
Okay,
me,
at least not openly.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I think for me, the most amazing part of being a Taiwanese American is you get to have the best of both worlds and create your own formula of how you think and interact with people. I think it sort of expands my, way of interacting with people. I feel like I'm, 70% Taiwanese, 30% American in this situation, but I can be a little bit more Taiwanese in that aspect when I'm dealing with, human beings. I'm a little bit softer, but when it comes to like performing myself, putting myself out there, there's like more the American aspect of me. So I think for me, the best part is being able to be flexible to express who I am and, having these two things and, sort of flexing one of the muscles if I want, if I need to, and then another one in another situation. I think that's the most amazing part for me, that I think, yeah. So anyways, thank you so much for joining us today for this event. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with us.